breaking barriers and bridging the gaps between patients and doctors. Welcome to Brainstorming with the Docs and your co-hosts, Dr. Glenn Harrison and Dr. Kolby Condos.
All right, everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of Brainstorming with the Docs. I'm Dr. Kolby Condos, my co-host, Dr. Glenn Harrison. What's up, bud?
Oh, not too much. I'm ready for this one. I like this because I think this is a conversation we have all too frequently with autoimmunity.
Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere, right? And I think that it gets tied into our day-to-day life so much because we see so much of it in clinic that we kind of take it for granted. We kind of just get conditioned to answering the questions over and over and over again. So I think that this would be a good platform to put it out on so that if people have questions about their own autoimmune condition and how do they know if it's getting better and how do they know if the efforts that they're implementing in their day-to-day life is working, well, this is a spot for you because we're going to go over some of that stuff.
That's exactly right. And autoimmunity can be so stealthy, and people can read so many books and apply so many principles and do so many lab tests, but it's not necessarily black and white. Are your efforts working or are they not working?
Right. And as someone who has it themselves, and you too, It's like, how do you know if what I'm doing is working? How do I, what are your key things that you want to look at to make sure that you're actually getting better? So I think that one of the biggest things that we identified is that there's a lot of, I guess, misconception about the lab findings associated with autoimmunity, because a lot of times people will get their lab work back and they go, oh yes, like my antibodies went down. It's like, well, that's great, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Yeah. That's maybe one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, about so many different autoimmune disorders. So, yeah.
So I think that when you look at the amount of immunoreactivity that you're having versus the amount of antibodies that you're having, you have to understand that the antibodies are a response to a perceived pathogen. And when you have autoimmunity, and we've talked about this in previous podcasts that you guys can look up if you're interested in that, but it's where you start producing antibodies to your own tissue. And in that other podcast, we reference like molecular mimicry and cross-reactivity and things like that. So go ahead and listen back in on that one. But the amount of immunoreactivity that you're having doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have high levels of antibodies, because it can actually be predicated on what the status of your immune system is actually at that given time. So if you've had a chronic infection or something like that, then you might not be able to generate as strong an immune response as you were previously. So it might actually look like your antibodies are artificially decreased when in actuality you're not making an immune response as much anymore.
Exactly. So always trying to measure the immune response is almost always the strategy of measuring antibody elevation or immunoglobulin elevation, and those numbers, trying to look to see if they're elevated or not. It could be skewed by just having a weak immune system and not being able to mount that response, so you can catch those numbers elevated. So yeah, sometimes the testing can be skewed. And then back to the antibodies, the goal of whether it's Hashimoto's, and we've done a podcast on Hashimoto's, thyroid, three parts on thyroid, and we've done one on autoimmunity all by itself. But looking for antibodies to be declined or reducing antibodies is the goal. The laboratory goal is highly inaccurate, because antibodies can blow like the wind. Sometimes they're high, sometimes they're low. But if they're elevated just once, if they're caught elevated just once, there's your diagnosis, if you're able to catch them once. But you can do all the strategies and it could drop. And I think we talked about antibodies don't really damage your tissue. They mark your tissue, and then they call in Big Brother to come and fight. So the more antibodies you have isn't an indicator, a quantitative indicator of the success of your management of your autoimmune condition or the lack of success of your autoimmune condition. They're on or they're off.
Exactly. So what are some things that you would look? So there's obviously, like, the lab findings are important and getting the blood work done is important. But when I look at how efficient our management strategies are, I look at other things as far as, like, are you tolerating your environment better? Are you able to use products that you weren't able to use before better? Are you able to eat a more diverse number of foods that you would have maybe been immune reactive to previously better? Is your energy levels better? Or when you're getting an immune response, is it less severe than it was previously?
Exactly. I think all of these are an indicator of what I think you just mentioned: oral tolerance, immune tolerance. Is your immune system reacting to everything, or is it starting to calm down and able to discriminate a little bit better with environmental and influences, whether it's pollen or environmental allergies or foods or what have you. And naturally, if our immune system is able to discriminate a little bit better with those environmental things, we should be pretty confident. We should be pretty confident that it's able to discriminate between us and something bad. So I think increasing the tolerance to all of these things are a big thing. And naturally, a side effect of increasing tolerance, not having your immune system react, you're going to start maintaining and preserving your energy and your metabolism. So naturally, you'll see energy start to maybe improve, hopefully improve.
Yeah, it's like not fighting a war against yourself anymore, right?
Exactly. And so I think those symptoms are a major component of understanding, are you managing your autoimmune disorder, your immune reactivity better? It's not as simple as let's just pull a blood marker. But I do think looking to see, again, we'll beat up the thyroid story because we were so versed in it, and we've talked about it a million times. And I was just working with a client yesterday. We were talking about this. We were doing follow-up labs, and this individual had Hashimoto's, and the antibody number was, after months of working, the antibody number was elevated. Like TPO was elevated another 100 points. It's like years ago, we'd be like, oh, well, that was a loss. We're losing now. Now, the antibody number doesn't necessarily really even matter, but what we're able to see is her thyroid hormones are actually climbed up without any medication. So her T4s and her T3s have climbed up and improved significantly. The only variable was lifestyle interventions, supplements correcting XYZ elemental P in her blood, in her lifestyle, to influence her blood. And lo and behold, in theory, Hashimoto's slowed down, immune irritation slowed down a little bit, and now there's less damage on the thyroid. It can perform better. So,
right, that's when she moved out of like hypothyroidism to a euthyroid. So her thyroid is no longer underperforming; it's just performing.
It's just performing. Yeah, it's performing now because it's not being damaged as much, and it was the result of working on all the other things that were aggravating the immune system. And so I think that would, and I explained that to her because this question comes up the same reason why we're doing this podcast. I explained this to her, looking at the raw numbers, the product of the gland or the tissue that's being targeted. If the product, in this case, is T3 and T4 hormone, if it is improved, we can be confident the tissue is not being damaged as much. That's the best way versus just looking at antibodies. And then everything you said, Dr. Kolby, of looking at the tolerance to our environments and to what things that used to be a problem. And then if there is an immune flare, is that flare as severe? If it's not as severe and there's not as frequent of flares, the flares are farther and farther apart. It's very, I think those are if there was a gold standard, I think those are the gold standards to see if you're properly managing your immune system, if your strategies are working.
Right. And then I think that talking about what we just talked about, are they less severe? Do you have more energy? This just translates to other areas of your life. Are you able to participate in your own life, or are you a spectator? Are you able to play with your kids? Are you able to go to family events? Are you able to spend time with your family and friends and doing the activities you enjoy? And that you're not sitting on the sidelines anymore, that you're actually able to participate because you're not either energy depleted or you're not just feeling like trash.
That's right. And I think you touched on something we never even talked about this, but then the two kind of worlds of autoimmunity is autoimmunity that's been diagnosed for a certain tissue in your body or organ system in your body. And then that's kind of more, I like to say, exclusive autoimmunity, targeted autoimmunity versus the systemic autoimmunities like the fibromyalgia, which I don't like that diagnosis, or the and we talked about this, or the lupus, these more systemic autoimmunities where they're kind of globally attacking all parts of your body. The rules are the same. you can't measure antibodies because they're not an indicator of success or lack of success, the quantity of antibodies. You kind of have to look at all the symptoms and the flares, like you're saying. And I even in myself, like, I have a platelet autoimmunity, I have a thyroid autoimmunity. I'm not going to look at TSH. I'm not going to look at antibodies. I'm going to look and see, are my platelets holding its own? Because my immune system's damaging my platelets. I'm not going to look at antibodies to platelets. I'm going to look at, are my platelets maintaining their herd? If they start in 15 days, I think platelets, if platelets start coming down, well, I know, my immune system must be lit up and irritating it more than it should. I got to relook at my strategy. So I think lab test with regards to that is a good way to judge our autoimmune strategies or our autoimmune strategies, I guess, versus just antibodies. So I think a combination of looking at the tolerance plus looking at, are you able to increase the quality of your life, or are social and recreational activities, have they been put on the back burner? Because those are the first ones to go, right? We got to dress up. We got to eat in the morning. We have to take care of our families. We have to go to our jobs and keep the lights on. But usually that's all the energy we'll have. We'll push through the day for that. But recreation and social interaction and social lives, they're the ones that fall to the wayside first. So when that starts coming on, you could be pretty confident that you're working on the right. You're on the right.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree. So tell me about an interesting case that you have.
Yeah, autoimmunity.
Stuff and some success stories. How's that? Because I think some people might get discouraged and they might feel like, I'm fighting this battle, just like, I'm not winning. I'm still feeling terrible. Like it does take a lot of work. It takes a lot of research. It takes finding a qualified provider that knows what they're doing about it. And it's a lot of work on your part, but you can do it.
Yes, someone definitely versed in the world of autoimmunity and not going to look at autoimmunity as just a blood test or just a food or just a supplement or just an activity routine or just a stress management routine or just emotional health, because that's
got to be all encompassing.
It has to be. I guess that's why we like autoimmunity and from our sides, because it's challenging and then if you get a good candidate and you put all the right pieces in place, a little bit of everything and some proper monitoring of what we talked about and more, you can have profound impacts. So I'm thinking one that came off the top of my head with random symptoms. There was a celiac diagnosis on this individual. She had severe celiac disease. So that's digestive autoimmunity. And then there was not yet diagnosed rheumatoid arthritis. I believe there would have been. It wasn't yet diagnosed. Hands and wrists. And this was a young, early 30s female. And there was weight gain and then there was anxiety. And then there was some random skin issues that were diagnosed as autoimmune. There was a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, which is autoimmune. Again, I don't like that diagnosis. Just because I don't think it's very specific enough, if we will. So she had all these things going on, and naturally, she had enough energy, barely enough energy to get through work, but social life took the back seat. She was scared of all the foods and anything coming into her environment because she was highly gluten reactive. So she avoided gluten, still wasn't doing enough. And, kind of coming at wit's end, and she had a lot of family support. So they helped her out and we started working together, and it was one piece at a time, but we looked at everything. We looked at the stresses in her work and the stresses in her life and what was keeping her up at night and why there were sleep problems and blood sugar issues, and naturally, of course, foods and nutraceuticals to try to buffer some of the immune irritation so the tissues could regenerate enough and not be an irritation all by itself. Because I think we think of these environmental effects damaging our tissues, but when the tissue gets damaged, it creates an irritation on the immune system, which further keeps that cycle going and going. But, this individual couldn't drive her motorcycle, and that really hit home for me. I think we talked about motorcycles quite a bit in our podcast, but she couldn't pull the clutch. She couldn't pull the clutch because there was too much pain, and she was naturally avoiding it. Didn't think she was able to do it anymore. Over time, she was able to slowly, her digestive system came back online, and there was less urgency and more environmental tolerance and oral tolerance. Of course, she couldn't jump into a gluten factory, but it wasn't the end of the world when she was around it a little bit. She had more exposure, made life a little bit easier. And then once that happened, you were able to see energy start climbing. Lo and behold, she was able to socialize again. She started to get her social life back and was going on trips. Oh, comfortable to get on a plane. Before you have these stomach issues, there is no warning, and you've got it's urgency. So that creates a lot of social anxiety of not having the comfort of your own home and the facilities of your own home. She was able to get past that, so even her anxiety levels came down. Anyway, it was one piece after another piece after another piece, and it was more than just blood work or just this. It was what was going on in her world and how things became easier for her, ultimately happier and engaging with life more and more and more. I'm glad to say after a few months, she was back on her motorcycle that next season. So she's got it now. And now that she knows what to do, and she keeps walking the line and knows what to monitor on her own, she can gauge her interventions on her own now and not require all these doctors or all these drugs or all of X, Y, and Z. So
that's amazing. And you can do it. Anyone can do it.
Yeah.
It just takes time and effort and the right resources.
I know you probably have a few cases floating around in your mind, or maybe there was even one today.
Yeah, I got a couple cool ones, but I did have one that had they had a history of dementia in their family, which after running a bunch of blood panels and some cross-reactive panels, I think was probably an undiagnosed autoimmunity. But she came in because she was worried about developing dementia like her mother had. She started developing it about the same time. She felt like her mind was slipping. She felt like she was forgetting where she'd put her keys. She was not wanting to drive anymore. She was losing her purse. Her husband's always telling her, "Oh, you're losing your mind." And after we did all this stuff and we implemented all these dietary strategies and came up with some other stuff that she did, she's been basically asymptomatic for the past 2 years. Travels by herself, drives by herself, doesn't have any of that loss of cognitive ability. She just really feels confident in being able to interact and engage within the framework of her own life. And I mean, she's a rock star. She continues to eat the way she's supposed to eat. She does what she's supposed to do. And she's basically in all symptom free for the most part, with the exception of an occasional flare up. But then again, when you've developed this balance, you get the flare up and it's not the end of the world anymore because you can get back to where you were before.
Yeah. Yeah. And then a big thing with kind of what you touched on is once things feel a little bit better, and once you get the disease process lightening, I don't want to say we're not curing anything, but it gets to not as severe.
Yeah. It eases up.
Yeah. Once it eases up, these lifestyle pieces become easier because you have more energy. And then you see the value of them, so you're more committed, and you're not just putting in labor. You actually see the changes, and then it's not nearly as hard. The beginning is always the biggest challenge. I mean, you got to have direction and focus and assistance at the start. But whatever, if whoever's listening to this and is like, well, I don't know if my efforts are working. Well, if you're not seeing the changes that we talked about, and get a qualified healthcare provider. And if you can't find one in your area, reach out to us. We might know some people in that area if we're not able to, if you're not in our area, and get it moving. Get it moving, because the longer autoimmunity progresses, the harder it is to dig out of it, because the tissue gets damaged. Some tissues don't regenerate.
And I think on top of what you just said too, if you're not seeing the results that you want, then you also need to step back and go, okay, like, am I as diligent? Am I doing everything exactly as I was told? Because in a lot of these cases, it's like all or nothing. Because it's like, I'm just going to have a little bit of an immune irritant. Well, that's not how it works. You're either having it or you're not having it. So if you're only half pulling out a food that irritates you, or you're only doing away with half the products that have the thing that's irritating you, well, then that's just not going to do it. You have to really be committed and really be focused and stay the course, because it's not going to happen overnight, but it can happen.
That's right. And when we talk about these irritants, it's literally your body's poison. It's like, I'm only going to drink, half a quart of oil today, not a full quart. Right. It's really, I'm only going to have a little bit of poison, not a lot of poison. Well, some cases there has to be a relatively strict line, and again, we're talking about antigens of consumption, but it could be something as simple as sleep deprivation.
Yep.
It could be a toxic individual. It could be not moving, not doing your stretches, and your inflammatory response is building up in your joints and creating aching, but stretching mitigates some of that. Well,
Could be pet dander.
yeah,
Yeah.
it could be, yeah, it could be Fido there. Yeah, it could be. Hopefully not. Hopefully
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
Oh, that'd be tough.
Yeah. But I think that's all I have about this one.
Yeah, I hope you guys got some value out of this. If you did, hit like and subscribe, turn on notifications, because we're going to keep rolling one out every single week. You never know when we might cover something that is applicable to you. If you guys have questions or comments, you can get a hold of us. We have an email associated with the podcast. It's info@brainstormingwiththedocs.com. You can get a lot of information. Dr. Glenn's website is absolutely fantastic, just chock full of information. His website is www.drgharrison.com. Or you can look at mine as well. There's some resources on there, and also my contact page. Mine is www.northlakeschiropractic.com. And yeah, stay tuned because we're going to keep them coming.
That's right. Well, I look forward to the next one, Dr. Kolby.
All right, buddy. Sounds good. I'll talk to you later.